Working with interpreters is often the best or only option when working abroad and communicating with the local population. These are 19 basic guidelines on the use of interpreters. 1. Be aware that a conversation conducted through an interpreter goes more slowly than a normal conversation. Plan your time accordingly. 2. Speak with the interpreter beforehand about the subject of the conversation, how you would like the conversation to develop, and what your aims are. For the interpreter's sake, formulate your sentences more concisely than in a normal conversation and dwell as little as possible on less important aspects of the subject. 3. Make it clear to the interpreter in advance that the translation has to be done consecutively. There will be a pause for the interpreter to provide the translation after every 2 or 3 sentences. Prior to the actual conversation, it's advisable to conduct a tryout when you're working with a new interpreter. 4. Check in advance whether any sensitivities exist between the interpreter and the person you're speaking with. This can be a result of ethnic background, position of power, or gender, for example. Make sure that the interpreter always behaves objectively and in a neutral manner towards the other person. 5. Observe the non-verbal communication of your counterpart when your message is interpreted and keep eye contact. 6. It's very important to speak slowly so that the interpreter can make notes if needed. 7. If you're going to give a speech or a presentation, provide your interpreter beforehand with the full text, or at least the main points of what you're going to say. If the subject is of a specialized military nature, then give the interpreter topic-related advice so that he or she is prepared. 8. If necessary, modify your use of language by choosing widely used, understandable terms whenever possible. Avoid military jargon or abbreviations. 9. Agree in advance with your interpreter where he or she will sit. If you are standing to conduct the conversation, your interpreter should also stand. 10. Make sure the interpreter is always close to you when you are speaking, so that the listeners don't have to keep switching their attention between you and your interpreter. The interpreter should preferably also be able to see you in order to observe your body language. 11. Inexperienced interpreters and people who've received no training as professional interpreters can feel ashamed if they haven't heard or understood something properly, and they are afraid to ask you to repeat what you've said. Emphasize that he or she can and must ask you to repeat if necessary, because this is always better than providing a quick but inaccurate or even incorrect translation. 12. Experienced interpreters can contribute significantly to good communication. Make use of their knowledge and experience. 13. At the start of the conversation, don't forget to introduce the interpreter to the other people taking part, so that everyone knows who the interpreter is and why he or she is present. Then explain to the attendees how you will conduct the conversation through the interpreter. 14. At the beginning of your conversation, ask your counterparts to speak slowly, with pauses after every 2 or 3 sentences to allow your interpreter to translate. 15. An interpreter has to provide a literal and truthful translation of everything that is said by the participants in the conversation. In practice, this is less straightforward than it seems. An interpreter is only permitted to merely provide a brief summary if you have explicitly requested him or her to do so. 16. If you intend to tell a joke or anecdote, inform the interpreter in advance so that the punchline in the target language comes at the right moment. But remember that the idea behind a particular joke is often lost in translation. 17. During long conversations, provide breaks more often than usual. Taking in information received through an interpreter is more difficult than during a normal conversation. Interpreting is an inherently strenuous task too. 18. If an interpreter behaves assertively, prevent him or her from taking the initiative away from you during the conversation. 19. If more interpreters are present during the conversation, agree on who will be translating which part of the meeting and for whom.